Good morning. Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes,
Okay.
good morning.
Great. Do we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum.
Okay, super. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. It's 8 o'clock, and let's begin with some announcements from Pedla.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I would do a roll call of all trustees to confirm attendance. From the audit committee members, Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Jones,
I'm here.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Knox,
Good morning. I'm here.
Mr. Moore,
Good morning, I'm here.
Mr. Santos,
Good morning, I'm here.
Chair Sanchez.
I am here.
From the Board of Retirement, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Kehoe, Ms. Gray, Mr. Harris, Mr. Robbins, Mr. Sanchez, Ms. Apanta. From the Board of Investments, Mr. Green, Mr. Kehoe, Ms. Greenwood, Ms. Jones.
Morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Kryman, Deputy CEO Luis Lugo, Chief Investment Officer John Grable, AEOs Laura Guglielmo and JJ Popovich, Chief Counsel Steve Rice, Senior Staff Counsel Jasmine Bath, and all division managers. Internal audit staff include Leisha Collins, Christina Logan, Christina Sun, Nathan Amick, George Lundy, and Gabriel Tafoya. Consultants include Marcy Sudbeck, Adam Jones, Alyssa Martin from Weaver and Tidwell. Audit Committee Consultant Robert Griffin. Trustees, if you would like to be placed in queue, please use the Zoom chat option. At this time, we ask all participants to mute their mics until we are ready to speak, and now we may proceed with the agenda.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So we have one agenda item change. We will be pulling. Christina, what is the item? I'm having some trouble logging into Board Vantage.
It's the operational due diligence agenda item.
Item what?
It is. I think it's the first agenda item.
Okay, so we will be pulling that item and reviewing it in our next meeting. So with that, I will go ahead and get started with some announcements from Mr. Rice. Mr. Rice, are you here?
Yes, I have no announcements.
Okay, well, sorry, do we have any public comments? I skipped that part.
No public comments at this time.
All right, do we have an approval of the minutes? Do we have any changes or comments for the minutes?
Move approval.
I'll second.
Thank you. Can you go ahead and take a vote?
Yes, Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Perla, it's Mr. Bernstein, and I'm slow on the unmute. I'm an aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And Perla, until I can get my Board Vantage going here, can you just read off the next agenda item?
So we
I
have
just
the,
emailed you the agenda packet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, Linda, what was that?
No, well, she's forwarding me the agenda packet, but that's,
Okay.
can you just read the next item so that we can move on with the meeting? Thank you.
Okay, the next consent item is the telework.
Okay,
I move approval.
I'll move.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
okay, we'll take a roll call.
Okay, Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
and Mr. Kelly. Not here, okay. Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore? Okay, I'll come back.
What
Mr.
item number is this again?
It's 4A.
Okay, aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Yes, and I have my agenda now in front of me.
Okay.
Thank you for that. We were suffering through some iPad issues. All right, so moving on to the non-consent items, we've pulled item 5A to the next meeting. So we'll move on to item 5B, which is a recommendation submitted by Christina Logan, Principal Internal Audit, and Nathan Amick, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee approve our request to release a request for proposal for a financial auditor. The RFP will request certified public accounting firms to submit bids to audit LACERA's annual financial statements for public years ending for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2023 to 2027, with an option to extend up to 2 years. And I believe this is going to be Nathan.
No, I'm
go.
sorry, Ms. Sanchez.
Yes.
This is actually 5A is remaining on. 5C was the item that was pulled.
And that is why I asked for the exact item number. So item A will remain. So let's go back to item A. Item C will be pulled.
Okay.
So item A is the recommendation is submitted by Richard Bendel, Chief Auditor, that the Audit Committee approve and review and approve the fiscal year ending 2023 audit plan. So Christina, go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and Audit Committee members. Since Richard isn't able to be with us, I will be presenting our audit plan for fiscal year end 2023. Next slide, please, Gabe. So our audit plan overview, I just want to go over really quickly that the Institute of Internal Auditors requires that chief audit executives establish a risk-based plan to determine the activities for the internal audit division, and those activities should be consistent with the organization's goals. I'm going to be going over how we developed the audit plan as this presentation continues. There are scope limitations to every audit plan. Although the plan looks at a wide range of activities, it doesn't provide coverage for all operations or business functions. We have to maximize the resources that we have. And then an audit plan is a living document, so there will be interim changes, and any significant amendments to the audit plan will be submitted to the audit committee for approval in advance. Next slide, please. So there's generally 3 types of audit engagements. There's the assurance engagement, which is designed to express an independent opinion about a subject using a set criteria to evaluate. We have consulting reviews, which are usually a collaboration between internal audit and management. It's designed to provide recommendations to improve governance, risk management, control processes without internal audit assuming any management responsibility. And then we have advisory projects, and those are usually informal advice or participating on teams. And lastly, we have internal audit operations, and these are the activities that internal audit divisions perform really that only affect our own division. They relate to our quality assurance and improvement program, professional development and training, audit committee supports. Next slide, please. So you may recall that at the February meeting, we brought a proposed draft audit plan and budget to you. At the May meeting, we discussed a sample of what our refined audit universe / risk assessment was going to look like. And we also talked about the current risks in the industry when we reviewed the IIA's 2022 on risk report. At this August meeting, I have the working document of our Audit Universe risk assessment, as well as the 2023 audit plan that we have submitted for the committee's approval. So we're going to move on to the risk assessment. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the risk assessment that was provided in your audit committee materials. It's on page 31, sorry, of the entire package. So this is just FAST's Financial Accounting Services Division. We wanted to highlight this to walk through the document with you. So in the past, we've always had the list of processes that each division provides to us. These are the key processes each division is responsible for. This year, when we were refining our audit universe, we decided that we would add the subdivision which comes from the organizational chart for each division. So you can see that for general accounting, there's a handful of sub-processes under it. The next column over is the last audit rating and date. So those are the audit reports that we've brought to you and the date, as well as the color represents the rating. The next slide is the audit priority. The next column, I'm sorry, is the audit priority. And this is based off of our discussions with the division manager, as well as just our understanding of what's going on with the process, prior audit findings. And so this is a collaboration with everybody in internal audits. We work together to come up with these audit priorities. The next column is the current year projects. And then the last two columns are the proposed projects, one for fiscal year 2023, this current year, and the next for looking forward 1 year. I think the most important thing to note are those boxes in blue under the fiscal year 2023. Those are projects that we wanted to do. They rose to the top of our priority, but when we applied the hours that we have available, we could not add those to our audit plan. So at this point, I'm just going to stop and see if anybody has any specific questions related to the risk assessment.
Christina, I'll start with a quick question. There are obviously audits that we couldn't get to this year that were on our current plan. And those, I assume, then get rolled into the new full plan. So that's that kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column over.
Yes, so
yeah,
they do roll over.
Got it. And then can you tell us a little bit, just briefly, about sort of your plan for tracking and monitoring the pace of projects and hours that they're taking relative to budgeting hours? Because I know that we kind of have a goal to try to improve the ability to forecast.
So that's coming.
Got it. Okay, sorry, jumping ahead.
This is just a stop and pause on the risk assessment document. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions on the risk assessment document, since we haven't provided this in prior years.
Are there any other questions?
I was just going to mention, Madam Chair, this is helpful seeing it in this format, if this is something we haven't had in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. I agree. By the way, I will second that. It has always been kind of a goal to see sort of what the full universe is, so we know what we're missing. It's incredibly helpful.
And I agree, Madam Chair, it is helpful, but if I can in the future, could we not do what appears to be 8-point print on stuff? If you could use 8.5 by 14-inch paper, some of us who are a little bit older would have an easier time reading the material. I would really appreciate that.
Yes, we will keep that in mind. Mr.
Thank you.
Bernstein. Okay, if there's no other comments or questions, we're going to move on to the next slide, Gabe. So in order to figure out our resources, we needed to calculate the total available staff hours. It's a pretty basic calculation. We end up with 12,320 hours. We apply those 12,320 hours to 70% audit engagements, 15% goes to our internal audit operations, and 15% we reserve for unplanned work. This breakdown between audit engagements, internal audit operations, and unplanned work is a fairly common breakdown between internal audit divisions. Next slide, please. So as Ms. Sanchez mentioned earlier, this is the slide on how we plan to manage our internal audit resources. So this year, we're really focusing on trying to get as many audits completed as possible. Our goal, I believe, is to complete 80% of the audit plan. So we're trying something different this year, and we are focusing quarter by quarter. So we have assigned a certain number of projects, or one project, to each senior internal auditor. And our hope is that we can complete each project each quarter. We also intend to focus more time on our preliminary planning to ensure that the scope of the audit is correct and that the budgeted hours are correct. The next area that we plan to focus on is ongoing monitoring. Each week, we meet with the senior internal auditors to discuss the status of assignments. And this year, we will be monitoring the hours spent on each project. So through teammates, we are able to track and monitor the time spent on each assignment. And any budget overages are going to be identified and must be supported and approved by the Chief Audit Executive for adjustments. And then quarterly, we do report to the Audit Committee updates to our audit plan at each meeting, and we will provide an explanation for any overages or delays in completing that work. Next slide. So here's the breakdown for our first quarter engagements. This takes into account resource constraints from the divisions that we'll be auditing. So it's not always convenient for a division to have us come in and perform an audit at a specific time in the fiscal year. So this focuses on that. You will see at the bottom, there are 4 oversight projects. These projects generally span the entire fiscal year. There is some more activity in certain months for each project, but they do span the whole year. These projects don't count as the one project assigned to each senior internal auditor. And there are 2 projects on here, the LA County Retired Retiree and Board Vantage audit, that we anticipate being completed September 2022. We're in the process of finalizing the audit report. And then the next slide is our internal audit operations. So I previously discussed this area. This is just the work we do on our own division. And then the last slide is just for questions and comments.
Great. So I'll just take a moment. I am particularly excited to see the work that we've spent building up the teammates process in order to allow for the sort of the more rigorous tracking analysis, so that we know when we're getting off track earlier in the process. It makes it also quite transparent for us as committee members to sort of know what's not getting accomplished or taking more time than expected. And then I have a first quick question, Christina. If there is a project or something happens that a department is unable to do that, will you make changes, pull items from other quarters forward to the first quarter in order to sort of keep full full productivity?
Yes. We will.
Great.
For the first quarter, I believe, we're already midway through the first quarter, so those
Yeah.
projects are pretty set.
Mhm.
We don't anticipate any changes for those, but yes, we have worked with, we will be working with the division managers and then moving projects around if needed.
Okay, super. I see two hands up, but I did not note who was first. Mr. Knox or Mr. Moore? We're going on the honor system here.
I yield to Mr. Moore if you'd like to go first.
Great.
I thought your hand was up first, but I'll go. Just keep things moving. I wanted to know from the staff whether or not they used some kind of peer review or analytical reports that gives you some kind of best practices guidance for internal audit departments and public pension funds, and how you should prioritize, your activity and staff that activity, so that we know that we're not doing, our prioritization and our resource allocation aren't out of step with what similarly situated agencies are doing.
So I think generally first, I would say that we have the external quality assessment review, right? That we just completed with the IIA, and that looked at just generally best practices of internal audit divisions, departments, activities. So that's our first step in making sure that we are on target with other internal audit divisions. And then I think your more specific question about our audit plan and the priorities of the work, there isn't a specific resource that we use, but we do review other peer public pension funds audit plans as we're preparing ours, to make sure that we've considered projects that are on their list, other areas that haven't come to our, that haven't risen to our area that we haven't considered previously. And we do have frequent discussions with CalPERS, CalSTRS, Texas, not Texas teachers, but we do have frequent discussions with them about their plan and our plan as well.
Okay, Mr. Knox.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of the available staff hours, what is the status of the senior auditor that's on loan and then filling the vacancy? Because that's 3,500 hours of time that could be spent elsewhere.
If I may, Mr. Knox, Laura Guglielmo with the Business Services Group. As you know, we're challenged as an organization with our hiring plan. So that senior auditor is still on loan to our systems division. This position is incorporated into our overall plan for trying to address the needs of the organization as a whole and manage all of that. The challenge with this particular position, like many of them, is that it's an individual position. So we're trying to balance the needs of the entire organization and the resources available within our human resources division. But we do recognize the importance of internal audit and the need to make sure that we are applying the appropriate resources to make sure that they have those, the ability to thoroughly and adequately do their job.
So I guess my question is still the same. Is there a time frame for filling that vacancy and for bringing this senior auditor back?
I'm struggling just because I don't have a time frame. We are focused on some other positions at the moment within our investment division and within our member services divisions and retiree healthcare divisions to focus on investments and direct member services at the moment.
Trustee Knox, let
Okay.
me, or through the chair, Chair Sanchez.
Go ahead.
We will come back to you specifically on that particular question. I just need to confer with my staff about what options we have in terms of moving that individual to a different IT item. I know that we've had discussions about that in the past, but I'd like to revisit it now. Now that we have, Jasmine is on board now with legal, and figure out how do we expedite that issue and then get the exam running. I know that it is on our hiring plan. I just don't know off the top of my head what that priority is. So if you will indulge us and give us a little bit more time, and we'll report out after the meeting with a memo.
Thank you.
Okay, and if I may, just one follow-up item, Ms. Logan, I see your hand, Joe. I just want to finish this item. Does that impact, does the person on loan impact the plan as sort of your projections right now?
No, we do not count that person.
Okay, all right, just checking. All right, thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize, I was late. Christina, we've talked in the past about the need to enhance IT auditing skill sets, and I'm wondering, can you speak to a little bit about what the plan is for that? Have staff started such trainings, or have you identified them?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the last?
Have you identified them?
Yes, so last year we did all attend the IIA's IT general controls training. It was about 16 hours of training on it. And then also in an effort to sort of address this, we have been meeting monthly to go over the IIA's practice guides, some of which include IT specific areas. And then this year we also have plans to attend another IT class. With the person on loan, that was our primary IT person. So I guess depending on the staffing situation, we will be looking to hire somebody also with significant IT experience.
Thank you very much, and I thought your report was well done, by the way.
Thank you.
Chair Sanchez, can I just add that I know that the IA staff has gone through some pretty significant teammates training, which I think reflects on the reports that you're now seeing. And I know that the management team is supposed to go to a second higher level teammates training as well in the next 30 days, I believe. I know that I signed off on those, so I just wanted to add that.
Yes, thank you for that comment. And I'm going to take a small vanity victory lap because I know that was part of the effort that came out of the RECO follow-up audit. So I felt very good about that. And quite frankly, I agree with you. I think that you can't change what you can't measure. And I think it does help us measure our progress a little better. So thank you for taking that seriously and ensuring that the organization follows you in that. All right. Any other questions, or can we move on? All right. Next item.
I believe
one more item. Got it. Thank you. Gosh, this morning is just going smoothly for me so far. All right. So
I move to approve the audit plan.
I will second.
Okay. Thank you. Perla, it's all yours.
Sorry, I was muted. Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, great. Any minute now, I'm going to get my groove. Just wait for it. So item 5B is our next item. The recommendation is submitted by Christina Logan, Principal Internal Audit Auditor, Nathan Amick, Senior Internal Auditor. that the committee approve our request to release a request for proposal for a financial auditor. The RFP will request certified public accounting firms to submit bids to audit LACERA's annual financial statements for fiscal years ending June 30, 2023 to 27, with an option to extend to 2 years. And I believe Mr. Amick is going to make that presentation.
Yes, good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees.
Thank you.
Before we get into the presentation, I would like to address as to why the full RFP was not provided for this meeting. As it stands right now, the RFP is approximately 50 pages, 2/3 of those pages being boilerplate language provided by the legal office or detailed instruction to the bidders regarding the logistics of how to submit their RFP. The remaining areas of the RFP are those related to the required qualifications of the audit firm, as well as the RFP and the statement of work for the auditors. Now, this presentation here focuses specifically on the required qualifications and the statement of work, as those are the most relevant in which we request the committee's input and opinion. Next slide, please, Gabe. And here's the table of contents for your perusal. Okay, next slide, please, Gabe. At this time, we request the committee to approve the release of an RFP to hire a new financial auditor. We are seeking to engage a CPA firm to conduct LACERA's annual financial statement audits. Per LACERA's procurement policy, we are proposing a 5-year contract with the option to extend for up to 2 years. We did receive a trustee comment regarding the need for a new partner to oversee the audit if an extension is given past year 6 into year 7. We will note this to the RFP and require the bidders to comment on how they would address this situation if the committee chooses the 2-year extension. Next slide, please, Gabe. It is the committee's chartered authority to approve the appointment and the compensation of the firm hired to perform LACERA's financial statement audits. The contract with our current financial auditor, Plant Moran, will conclude this fall at the completion of the June 30, 2022 financial statement audit. Next slide, please, Gabe. Here you can see some of the key resources we used while developing the RFP. We did spend a fair amount of time comparing our last financial auditor RFP to more recent financial auditor RFPs of our peer funds, particularly CalPERS and LACERA. Next slide, please, Gabe. So the firm selected will be required to provide the following services: an audited opinion for the pension trust, as well as the OPEB trust and the OPEB agency fund. We're also requiring an opinion regarding LACERA's GASB 68 schedule and an audited opinion for the change in fiduciary net position of the OPEB trust. And we're also requesting a review and summarized report of LACERA's disability retirement processes and some other minor projects, as you can see here. Next slide, please, Gabe. The selected firm shall be required to comply with generally accepted and auditing standards and accounting principles, as well as government auditing standards. We also require compliance to the AICPA standards of employee benefits, as well as the California Controller's minimum requirements. Next slide, please, Gabe. So the selected firm required is to be a CPA firm established in the United States, active in the state of California and registered with the CPA, and be providing audit and attestation services. The selected firm must not provide any services to the plan sponsor for the duration of the contract. In the last 5 years, they must have conducted 2 audits of defined benefit pension plans with assets that exceed $10 billion at the time of audit. They also must have a minimum of 5 years experience in GASB 67, 68, 74, and 75, and a minimum of 5 years experience in auditing various investment classes. Next slide, please, Gabe. Team member qualifications. All team members must have public accounting experience with experience in auditing defined benefit pension plans, as well as OPEB funds and investment auditing experience. All team members must be CPAs, with the partner and the manager being registered CPAs to practice in California. The partner in charge must have been the partner on at least 2 pension audit plan pardon me. The partner must have been the partner in charge on at least 2 pension plan audits with assets that exceed 10 billion in assets at the time of the audit. Next slide, please, Gabe. To plan and develop the RFP, internal audit worked with its key stakeholders to ensure all necessary needs were met. And while all these stakeholders will not be part of the evaluation team, we did request their input in the development of this RFP and applied it where necessary. Next slide, please, Gabe. Here we have a pie chart depicting the criteria and the weighting given to each category. More than half of the bidder scores depended on firm team background and experience, as we just discussed. The third largest weighting is in evaluating methodology and work plan for completing the audit. And of course, we'll be evaluating fees as well as the bidder's adherence to the RFP submission instructions. We did receive a trustee comment regarding COLA adjustments with regards to fees. It is the bidder's prerogative how to schedule their proposed fees. Other than a do not exceed amount, we do not make any fee stipulations. If they include COLA adjustments to their fees, we will evaluate them accordingly. Next slide, please, Gabe. Here is the proposed evaluation team. As you can see, it's made up of management and staff from the executive office, internal audit, FASD, and benefits division. And seeing how this is one of the primary roles of the audit committee, we welcome your participation if you would like to choose to be on the evaluation team. Next slide, please, Gabe. And here is the RFP timeline. You can see the timeline for the process culminating in your selection at the February meeting, with work commencing in April. And we'll go ahead and take questions at this time.
Okay, super. We have a couple of questions in line. I'm gonna start with a quick question. Do you have a sense of how many firms meet the minimum criteria?
At this time, we know of approximately 5 firms that will meet it. However, we plan to take a 3-pronged approach to getting as many bids as possible. Of course, this is a public document. It's out there for anybody in the public to see. We're going to research our peer funds and see who their auditors are. And then we're going to do some additional research to see other funds that, or pardon me, other firms that meet the requirements and reach out to them directly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan, for your presentation. I thought it went very well. I was the trustee who submitted the question about COLAs, because I thought if we're looking at this contract over 7 years, and with inflation being what it is, it would be reasonable for a firm to submit a proposal with COLAs. But I thought there was a restriction that LACERA did not entertain COLAs, or perhaps I'm incorrect, and that was the county.
I'm not aware from a LACERA standpoint. Our current contract with Plant Moran, they do have COLA increases. I'm not sure if it's every single year to year, but over the last 76 years, there have been minor increases in fees.
Okay, I think we should be open to fee increases, within the 7-year contract term. That was it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Santos? Mr. Santos?
Not here. Thank you. Where does the diversity and inclusion tied initiative fits in within the qualifications or requirements of this RFP?
Yes, we definitely look at that when we're looking at the qualifications. One of the evaluation criteria is the diversity requirements required here at LACERA.
That's under the firm background, Mr. Santos.
I'm sorry?
It's under the firm background.
Okay. And so that complies with that tied initiative?
The Tide Initiative is related to the Investments Office. So it doesn't exactly tie to the Tide Initiative, but we will be evaluating diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, I would respectfully request that the application of that policy includes audit.
Mr. Santos, that might be a jog C item.
No, this is at the audit committee.
Oh,
Audit
no,
committee is an
I
independent
understand that.
Yeah, it's an independent
I-
committee that needs to comply with all the policies that we have in the organization, especially with diversity and inclusion.
I agree with you. I was simply saying, does Tide, well, maybe this is a question for you. Is Tide a policy of the organization or a policy of the investment division?
It should be of the entire organization. You know, I would like to hear from Mr. Kryman or Mr. Lugo as to what the position is, but diversity and inclusion is organization-wide, or it should be an organization-wide policy.
Okay, so I see Mr. Grable and Mr. Lugo. Who wants to go first?
Oh, Mr. Graber, if you want to go in terms of the Tide Initiative, and I can talk more organizationally.
Madam Chair, I was just going to offer that we're happy to share with the evaluation committee the due diligence questionnaire that the investment offices uses with our business partners to provide the information for the evaluation committee to use.
Thank you.
And Chair Sanchez, Trustee Santos, similarly, that's one of the things that we've talked about organizationally is adopting some of the approaches with Tide organizationally for all our RFPs. So that's been a point of conversation and something that we're going to take action on to have it more prevalent in terms of our RFPs and ensure that it's unified across all of our RFPs that go out.
Okay, super. Mr. Santos, is that good?
A point of order, Madam Chair.
I would like to hear from Mr. Moore. Yeah.
A point of order. Tide was an effort by the trustees to ratify a policy that staff had already implemented. Not only do I agree with Mr. Santos, it seems highly illogical to me that there's any way that audit or this RFP is exempt from Tide and the predating staff initiatives regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay, and I agree. I thank you for that. All right. So I think we're clear on this, and so that will be included in the RFP process. And Mr. Grable will share that with the audit division. Mr. Moore.
Yes, the last year I was on the Board of Investment, I had made 2 policy proposals to the Board of Retirement and the Board of Investment to address diversity and inclusion with specific plans with goals and objectives and outcome expectations for diversity and inclusion. And the Tide Initiative on the investment board addressed those issues. On the retirement board, my focus was to, in instances as we're talking about right now, where we're engaging in procuring from consultant services, that diversity and inclusion be a part of the criteria for evaluating proposers. And I saw that mentioned, somebody said in the criteria where part of the company background includes how they approach diversity and inclusion. But as Mr. Santos raised, we want to make certain that there's some points associated with that and that there's some outcome expectation that our consultant core that provide administrative services is reflective of the people who are providing those services, and women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses get an opportunity to provide those services or bid on those services. Now, Mr. Amick said that part of the outreach process, which would be a whole part of being intentional about diversity and inclusion, was going to consist of him actually reaching out to different organizations and finding out who they're using and what companies are out there that meet our qualifications, other than the 5 people that you mentioned earlier, and make sure that they're included in the process. So that is kind of the objective that I would expect you would include in all of the contracting, not just investment managers in the investment division or investment board, but all the services that we contract for on the retirement side. This joint committee should have the same approach to including everybody and being able to provide services.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I do agree with you. I see Mr. Kreiman has his hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to assure the trustees that the DEI effort is going to be office-wide, organization-wide. It's not just exclusive to the investment section. Investments, quite frankly, are a model in terms of using DEI as part of their evaluation process. And so we intend on working closely with John and his staff, and I appreciate the checklist to make sure that it is part of the evaluation process, and not only contracting for consultants, but also purchasing, the regular services supplies moving forward for the organization. And so we will make sure that for this particular RFP, that DEI is front and center in terms of our evaluation, as well as when we come back in the future for any consultant work that is required on the BOR side as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware. We do evaluate those things as part of our ongoing due diligence. We haven't formalized it quite or crystallized it quite like John has done in the investment side, but that's something that we've been discussing as part of the strategic planning process. DEI is something that I think is important, and we're going to make sure that it be part of LACERA's culture and ongoing business practices.
Super, thank you. And I'll just make one final comment. I think that the message has been delivered very loud and clear. And I agree that this is absolutely important organizational in terms of being a broad organizational effort. I'm 100% behind that. I will say that I was unclear as to whether or not it was a divisional effort versus an organizational effort. So I'm actually very pleased that Mr. Santos brought that up, and that this becomes sort of the next poster child, and hopefully it will catch fire across the organization. And so I'll look forward to seeing that move on. And at some point, we might even entertain a civil rights audit.
Staff recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
I'll do
Go ahead and take a roll call.
Okay, Mr. Bernstein? Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Aye.
Chair Sanchez?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay. Super. It is 8:49. I propose we take a quick 10-minute break before moving on to the audit reviews. I don't know about you guys, but I need regular breaks. So if we could reconvene at 9 o'clock, just to round up, that would be great. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We are live streaming and recording. So we will move on to item 5D, which is the organizational governance assessment. So that will be introduced by Ms. Logan.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. The IIA requires internal audit divisions to assess and make recommendations to improve organizational governance. This requirement is also addressed in both our internal audit charter as well as the audit committee charter. We decided for LACERA's first organizational governance assessment that it would be helpful to have it be a high-level maturity assessment, a consulting engagement, which is a collaboration between internal audit and management. And this maturity assessment is a snapshot of LACERA's current state versus its desired state. The committee approved the hiring of Weaver to perform this engagement at its February 2022 meeting, and Weaver will be presenting the results of their work shortly. As noted in the memo that we prepared, we do not plan to track the 9 observations through our regular recommendation follow-up. Instead, we plan to work with the executive office as well as the audit committee to understand the key organizational governance areas that you'll be focusing on to improve during the year. And then we plan to follow up on that this year. We've defined observations as being more strategic in nature than our general recommendations, and they have a longer timeline, so it's harder for us to track through reco follow-up. We want to highlight that this was a consulting review. It was not designed to provide assurance, and the goal of the engagement was really to understand LACERA's current state of organizational governance and provide guidance on how to further mature. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa.
Thank you, Christina and Chair Sanchez, audit committee members. I am Elisa Martin with the firm of Weaver, and I was the lead partner on this engagement. Next slide. I want to start with just an overview of the assessment, and in this particular part, a definition of organizational governance. Organizational governance supports and encourages the growth and development of a strategically focused, risk-aware, and operationally effective organization. Next slide. In that, we definitely identified how LACERA is organized and evaluated appropriate for just LACERA overall. Specifically, as Christina noted, we went through a collaborative process with LACERA Internal Audit and Weaver to customize our structured governance model. And that particular structure was focused on executive leadership and management. We customized that model specific for the attributes that are relevant to LACERA. This is not an audit or an assessment of assurance. This is rather an assessment against a maturity model, as Christina noted. That maturity model is rationalized to be appropriate for what's relevant for LACERA and should be expected for achievement. And we executed our engagement through a collaborative process with very intentional interaction with leadership and functional management. Next slide. As a summary, within the reports for which you have our full report, structure and accountability is relatively mature area across LACERA. That's been helped by Santos and his actions, including the reorg, new hires, key specific hires, and his 100-day plan. The area of assessment and risk management continues to need strengthening, and we'll see the observations as I walk through the rest of my presentation. Next slide. Specific to the scope of this engagement, the objective was to assess LACERA's organizational governance and proceed and specifically plan to cover these 5 actions: ethics and values, risk management, detection and prevention of fraud, systems and internal control, and compliance. So within our model, we focused on those activities and attributes as they span the governance areas. As Christina noted, this is a limited scope, and our procedures were focused on validating the existence of key organizational governance areas and those element activities that are in place. We did not execute any effectiveness testing, and there is no level of assurance on this report. It is a consulting engagement. We did, however, look at a review period, and our review period was all through December of 2020 to February of 2022 when we started the engagement. So looking at a point in time assessment, but also procedural activities that happened for the 14 months up to that point in time. We developed a targeted maturity expectation with management, and that perspective was a forward view of achievement within the next 18 to 24 months. So it's not a long-term view. It's really a more short-term view, 18 to 24 months of achievement for specific elements. Our methodology started with customizing a governance model. So our standard structured governance model customized to LACERA for effectiveness and for applicability. We interviewed key management. We reviewed all policies, procedures, board actions, and processes and documentation that was in work and in play. We conducted a staff survey and specific management interviews, as well as analyzing those results against the maturity model. Next slide. The governance model that we evaluated against is as follows. We have 5 governance elements with 27 subject categories. Within each of those subject categories, individual attributes were identified and articulated for the evaluation. The 5 categories start with oversight, strategy, policy, and procedure. The next category is structure and accountability. Moving to ethical values and fraud prevention, communication and reporting, and assessment and risk management. The combination of all 5 of those governance elements encompass governance requirements from authoritative frameworks. The model itself is an advancing maturity scale. At the top of this page, you can see the advancing maturity scale, starting with initial, which is informal, it's undefined, relatively ad hoc, operating up to optimized. And optimized is truly continuous improvement. The attributes and the degree of maturity of each governance element was evaluated against each of those subject categories. And it's important to recognize that the governance model is not a leverage model that with the expectation that the goal should always be to get to optimized. Optimized may require more resources, additional effort with no return. So it is an evaluation of a management structure to determine what is appropriate and relevant for the particular activity. Next slide. Just looking down a little bit further at the organizational governance model, we assessed this integrated model against the 5 stages of maturity and the 5 elements. Breaking it down a little further, you can see here on the graphic that the assessment detailed 176 attributes. We evaluated all 176 attributes against policy, procedure, management execution, documentation in place, as well as our survey and interviews. The graphic depicts the maturity continuum and specific expectations of that continuum. And it's important to note that each attribute may be represented at a different level of maturity. The model uses an integrated approach for which attributes build on each other, and those less mature areas often don't include all of the attributes of a fully implemented governance structure. So certain attributes may come into play at more mature levels, like defined, managed. Defined and managed, is clearly, you can see, is where the bulk of the additional governance attributes come into play. Next slide. As a summary, we interviewed executive team to determine the targeted maturity. Targeted maturity, as I mentioned, is a reasonable expectation of what can be achieved in the next 18 to 24 months, as well as a reasonable expectation of what's necessary for effective governance at LACERA. The black lines on this graph indicate the targets set in collaboration with the executive management team. The color bars represent the current state of maturity. Said differently, that would be through these 5 governance areas, where did we find full achievement, not partial achievement, but full achievement of the specific attributes within that governance element, like oversight, strategy, policy, and procedure, and at the expected level of maturity. So the gray areas, just looking at the first bar of oversight, there's a gray area about halfway there in repeatable. That represents that there are specific attributes that are not fully achieved. And I emphasize fully achieved because we do see partial achievement with it across LACERA. But when we're looking at full achievement, we're looking at organizational wide, all activities, the entire organization. And so we will identify that the targets set by management, there is a large amount of achievement to gain to that target already. So if you're looking at 18 to 24 months, the goal would be to understand what needs to be implemented to fully achieve, in this illustration, the gray areas. Going to the next slide. This graph is a much more detailed illustration of the separate 27 subject categories across each of those 5 governance elements. And so the bars represent specific subjects. Those specific subjects break up into where they are fully achieved. And you'll see some subjects are fully achieved or even beyond the overall target of that particular governance element. Represents a really good depiction of what's already in place and implemented across all of the organization, all parts of LACERA. The targeted maturity was not set on a per subject basis, but rather for each of the 5 governance elements. And then you'll also notice that there are gray areas under the black lines. Those gray areas represent the specific attributes. It could be 1, 2, 5 attributes that make up those gray areas that are not fully achieved. I'll also point out we have 2 areas with no achievement. Succession planning. Succession planning comes at a more mature level, such as defined, and it begins at repeatable. And currently there is not a succession plan implemented across all of LACERA. Risk assessment currently operates in an ad hoc way, but when we look at risk assessment outside of internal audit, the documentation and full implementation is not represented. Moving to the next slide. So based on the graphical representation, and as I mentioned, the targeted maturity goal set in conjunction with management, the relative strength within LACERA from a governance standpoint is structure and accountability, which is great. Structure and accountability includes the organizational structure, that delegation of authority across the organization, and policies, procedures, and internal controls to support that structure. The least mature area is assessment and risk management, which includes risk assessment as well as compliance. And so in summary, LACERA has absolutely effectively executed its primary mission across the organization. We do observe and understand that there are also some areas that executive management is in the process of implementing and in the process of putting in place. And so currently, based on full implementation, there is not a current strategic plan across all of LACERA as of the spring of 22. The organization is not consistently metric driven for decision making and operations. While there is an established training budget, there's no professional development plan to address employee trainings and leadership training. We currently do not have an organizational succession plan. There's no enterprise-wide risk assessment or compliance framework, and there's no comprehensive fraud detection and prevention plan. Now, while I say and represent to you those gaps, it is also very important to note, next slide, that we identified management activities that are already taken and in place. Many of these activities were underway prior to our starting in February of 22. And management was not surprised by some of the gaps that we identified, but rather they just wanted a validation and a assessment with a point of time, as of a point of time, and a maturity model guide to continue the progression and success. Several of the initiatives that are already undertaken by LACERA do mitigate the gaps that we identified in the maturity model. And some of these initiatives were started, as I said, prior to the scope of this engagement beginning. Some of those that I'd like to point out are the strategic plan, which is still in progress, policies and procedures council that was implemented, the compliance director position that is described and open, and then the IT communications council. All of those were management activities that we identified that specifically relate to some of the gaps for full implementation and are in place and already in the works across LACERA. Next slide. The 9 observations that we have that Christina mentioned would not be necessarily followed up are as follows. We have 5 high-risk rated observations: organizational strategic plan, currently in process; policies and procedures, internal control, where they are reviewed and revised to reflect current operations on a routine schedule; succession plan, which is not currently in place; the CEO job description and the board committee responsibilities, where there is overlap and even some conflicts with no clear distinction on the management role; risk management and compliance with no formal enterprise risk assessment or compliance program framework. Those are the high. The 4 that are medium risk rated are professional development plan, where you do have a budget in place, but not a full plan implemented; fraud prevention and detection, where fraud identification and reporting is in place, but no prevention and detection program; a communication plan, which is written but not implemented; and key performance indicators consistently used to measure metric-driven expectations across the organization. Those are the 9 observations. With that, I'll conclude and take questions and in whatever order you would like to.
Okay. Thank you. And I will also, we will also be inviting Mr. Griffin to also make some comments on your findings as well. Mr. Griffin, would you like to wait until the questions roll through so that you can also address those in your comments, or do you want to comment now?
No, I'll wait and hear the questions.
Okay, super. So I'll take the chair's prerogative. And I have I think one of the things that was most alarming when I went through this initially was that two particular areas that we had more or less informal procedures by your evaluation was fraud detection and prevention and KPI and measurement. As the chair of the audit committee, I found that just incredibly unsettling. And I was also surprised to find that in your kind of recommendations, you place those as medium rather than high. And I recognize that to me, those seem like they should be higher in priority. So if you could just kind of give us some insight as to how those got rated.
Absolutely, and I'm going to use this opportunity to recognize my two colleagues that are on that can help address those questions. Marcy Sunbeck performed the evaluation of the fraud detection and prevention programming, and so Marcy, I might invite you to respond to that question.
Sure, thank you. So as far as the fraud prevention and detection, there are, I guess I should say, there are steps or there are processes in place that LACERA is doing. There's just not a formal program of it, i.e. there's an ethics policy, there's not a separate fraud policy, which we have seen that in other organizations. You do have a very mature hotline process with the reporting. And so, I mean, there's credit given to that. So I think because of the things that LACERA already has in place as far as the fraud prevention and detection is concerned, that's why it was rated more of a medium, because it's not like it doesn't exist at all. It's just there's not a formal program put in place. So that's where that rating stems from.
Got it. Okay. And the KPI and accountability?
I would invite my colleague Adam Jones to respond to that.
Thank you, Lisa. The specifics around KPI being moderate instead of high risk, I think fundamentally has to do with there are KPIs that exist in various divisions of LACERA. Investments, for example, has a fairly mature KPI process. There are other KPIs in, for example, your IT division. What does not exist at LACERA is key performance indicators aligned to objectives and goals that you would see in a strategic plan. You'll get there assuming strategic plan implementation, but right now they're inconsistently applied across the organization, although we observed several divisions that had relatively mature KPI processes. It's just organization-wide finding that needs to be tied strategically to your goals and objectives.
I see. Okay, thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you to the Weaver team and also to staff. A couple of comments. One is, I did not think that the report appropriately reflected the nuance of succession planning in the public sector. I think it's written really from a private sector perspective that I, Joe Kelly, manager, think that Gina Sanchez is great, so I'm going to groom her to take my job. That's not how it works in the public sector. Every single one of my direct reports who's eligible for the position, I'm responsible for recruiting, and they can competitively compete for the recruitment. So I was very uncomfortable that the report was, from the succession planning perspective, the few comments provided were, in my view, written from the perspective of a private sector firm and not a public sector firm, number one. Number two, I'm not very comfortable, Christina, that we are with the recommendation that we do not follow up on these recommendations. This was an important report. I understand there's a lot going on in terms of strategic planning, et cetera. But this report has come to this committee. And I think every report that comes to this committee, if it has observations or recommendations or whatever we call them, depending on type of engagement it is, we need to follow up on those recommendations or those observations. You've worked hard with the team in the last year, thanks to Ms. Sanchez's efforts last year, to automate the RECO follow-up process. There should all be in teammates. Announcements are going out to divisions in terms of requesting status automatically, et cetera. So I'm not buying into the fact that it would be hard to do, which is kind of the excuse, I think, as well. So I would move the item, but not with the recommendation that we not follow up on the audit observations, but that we specifically do follow up on the audit observations. Thank you very much again to the teams for their work. I thought it was a really good report.
Madam Chair, do you want me to address succession planning first before we move to Ms. Logan?
Sure, thank you.
On the succession planning maturity continuum, I'm going to try and respectfully disagree. There are components of succession planning that can exist within a civil service context or even within a union context in the public sector. We have had success developing succession planning initiatives for other public sector agencies. They do not look like they look in the private sector, but there are still initiatives around strategic recruitment, around mentorship, around leadership immersion that we think can be exhibited in the mature public agency. So I appreciate your I appreciate your concern. I do think there are areas where you can improve the maturity of succession planning. There are public agencies that choose not to engage in those activities because, yeah, in a civil service environment, there is a risk associated with that. And we also understand that, but that's what I would say about succession planning. And I absolutely respect your opinion on that, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Logan, do you want to make comments or do you want to let Mr. Griffin address that at the end?
We can wait for Mr. Griffin. We can address it. at the
Okay,
end.
so yeah, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Griffin was also going to opine on that same issue, the issue that you brought up about the RECO follow-up. So that conversation will continue and then we can follow up with you and make sure that you're satisfied. Mr. Moore?
Yes, I found the report to be very insightful, and I think it provides us with a number of initiatives that we could look into and maybe move forward with. I agree with Mr. Kelly that we shouldn't just take the report and the observations and recommendations and say, we'll put them on the shelf like so many other reports. Even if we're not going to pursue a particular recommendation, we can say, we looked at it and we're not doing that. Or we looked at this one and maybe there's something there and we'll look into it. So I was particularly interested in observation number 5. And just in summary, the potential conflicts or overlapping of responsibilities between the board committees, and the executive office. I like a little bit more detail, more information. Is there a report or something that you would provide that details what your observations were specifically and where you saw conflicts and overlap between various responsibilities? So could you comment on that?
I'll be happy to start, and then I'll let Marcy Sunbeck also add. We did a side-by-side evaluation, and we looked at the governance expectation of direction and oversight from a board committee versus execution and implementation of the management responsibility. So that's the perspective, as I said, a clear distinction and role between those two efforts. And not only do we have the side-by-side evaluation that is in our underlying work papers provided to internal audit, but we've provided some context around that as well. Marcy, do you want to add anything else to that?
Well, I can kind of touch a little bit upon the areas that Mr. Moore had asked about. So when we did the side-by-side comparison, we saw that there was some overlap between, and I'll just use this one as an example, but obviously our recommendation is that we look at all of the oversight committee responsibilities. I mean, all of the board committee responsibilities and make sure that they are aligned correctly, but particularly the operations oversight committee. There were quite a few responsibilities for that committee that overlapped with what the CEO job description also listed, as far as the budgeting area, the contract management policies and procedures, several different areas of policies and procedures, document retention. So there were just areas like that you would expect would be more the responsibility, if you will, of the executive or the CEO to manage the organization with the
board or board committees just having more of an oversight and not maybe being quite as involved in those activities.
Okay, well, I think those are some of the things that we might want to clear up just to make sure that maybe in practice, we're not doing what it says that we're doing in the charter and just the normal everyday operations. But if that's conflicting, then we ought to just clear it up and make sure that how we actually work is what's documented and not what we think we want to have, or we would like to see it work like this, but in practice, this is how it works, and let's just accept the authority of the CEO in certain instances. So that's one of the ones I think we ought to follow up on.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Jones?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and the report was very thorough. I've been through a similar one in my work, and it's a very tough type of audit to go through. And but the piece I was missing, or that I had a question on, was looking for management's response to some of the observations, and where do we go forward. And it was also kind of piggybacking on Trustee Kelly's observation, for example, of the comment about succession planning, because he is right, there are some restrictions that are there, and maybe that should be articulated in the management response. We can't have the appearance that we've identified staff that could take a position without giving a fair and equitable opportunity for all employees to apply when there's a vacancy. But I do agree that there's work that can be done per your report as far as providing the training and making sure that the staff have been given the best opportunity to succeed at higher level positions. But I just think maybe a management response could be a part of this that also outline, as other trustees have indicated, what are we going to do with this information? How are we going to transition and implement some of these recommendations within the organization? So I don't know if there's a separate report or if there's an opportunity for management to respond. I was just wondering how that piece would factor into how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Logan, do you want to briefly reiterate the plan, and then we'll also have Mr. Griffin comment on that at the end?
Yeah, okay, so let me try to re-explain what our thought process was. So we wanted to bring this report to the audit committee and have this discussion. I did note Mr. Moore's comment about observation 5, and that was an area that he was interested in. The succession planning comment from Mr. Kelly, as well as the KPIs. But so our goal was to come to this meeting, understand where the audit committee would like us to focus on from these observations. And then we intend to work with the executive office to see which of these observations they also intend to focus on in this next year to 18 months. And from there, we will create a memo to the audit committee, I guess, sort of like RECO follow-up, talking about what we plan or what the executive office plans to do. And then towards the tail end of this fiscal year, we would come back and look to see what has been done. So it's slightly different than our regular recommendation follow-up. But we aren't just putting it on the shelf, I guess is what I would like to reiterate.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Logan, if you could, when you structure that memo, I think what would be helpful, because normally when we get an audit or even an engagement like this, there would normally be a kind of departmental, or in this case, management response that would have been included as part of that. And I think there is management commentary that has been effectively taken into this. And so to the degree that we know what that is so far, like Alyssa, you commented, for example, on the fact that you know, in your interviews had a sense of what was already in place. So I think that should also be kind of, if you could suss that out in the memo, I think that would also be very helpful. Great. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. No, I also want to echo Mr. Moore's comment with regards to observation 5. And that is critical because in my view, it allows for the boards or trustees to attempt to micromanage the operation, which in my view is very dangerous. You know, we hire a CEO and management, high-level managers to run the organization. The only way we can hold them accountable is to let them do the work and not interfere with that. And then if there's something goes wrong, here we are. But that's important. So, and there's a lot of confusion as to what goes to what committee, what's management's prerogative. That is horrendous how this organization is run from that perspective. Just to give you an idea, the last week we had an issue regarding emails and IT, and there seems to be, in my view, a confusion by management because of the lack of direction, the lack of clarity, this overlapping duties. Where does this item go? Does it go to the board of retirement? It goes to the JAC? It's confusing. And so I like to support Mr. Moore's, and I believe Mr. Kelly as well, that this is something, this is an area that needs to be followed up ASAP. We cannot operate like that. So especially with the Operations and Oversight Committee, that is something that I observed when I first got to the Board of Retirement, that pretty much we are micromanaging. Management's hands are tied because everything has to go to the Operation and Oversight Committee. So we need to clarify all that. There's no committee on the Board of Investments that micromanages what the CIO, the investment staff does. So it should be the same thing with the Board of Retirement. So I will request that will be high priority in terms of figuring that out, review the different policies there, and take it back to the Board of Retirement and begin to clarify that. And also the efficiency aspect of it. A lot of times we in public sector organizations that are guilty of this all the time. It's just that it's just so difficult to move, to get things done, because everything has to go to this committee and that committee, and there's confusion as to what goes where. It's horrible. So I will encourage management to highlight and prioritize that particular observation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos, and I wholeheartedly agree. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Christine, I understand your comments, but we have a recommendation follow-up process in place and it works. I don't understand why we need to massage that into something unique and special for this audit report. It's gonna be an exception. Recommendations and observations are gonna fall out. It just makes no sense to me. We have a standard process in place and we should follow that standard process related to this report.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And I will agree that is exactly how I feel in the regard that I do think these things should be put onto a process. I think given that it is so tied to the strategic planning, I think that what we follow up has to be informed a little bit. So that's just my thoughts on that. So, but I agree with you in spirit. And so I think we'll, again, we're going to come back to Mr. Griffith at the end as well. Mr. Kryman, you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I think it's important for the trustees to understand that this particular engagement was a very limited engagement. It didn't do a real full deep dive into all of the processes that they were looking at. The strategic plan is definitely a document that I believe needs to be completed because the intention of the strategic plan is not only to provide guidance to staff and direction from the trustees about the future direction of the office and what we want it to be in the next 5 to 10 years. But it also is going to provide some concrete objectives that we can tie our managers' performance to. And that's something that we've been lacking, quite frankly. Ever since I got here, I didn't really see a connection between our objectives and our goals with the performance evaluations that are completed on a year-to-year basis. So in terms of succession planning, one of the things that we observed early on, and if you read the 100-day report, there's a lot of information in there about succession planning and training and development of staff. My observations have been that we do training in order for our staff to make sure that they meet their certification qualifications. And they don't really, they're not really trained for leadership development, management training, the softer skills that are needed to go to the higher levels of the organization. And that's something that Carly and Laura and Lewis and JJ and I are focused in on to try to figure out how do we cobble together something so that we view it as an investment into not only the employee, but it has to generate returns also for the benefit of LACERA and its members as well. So it's not just training for training's sake. So we are, as part of the strategic planning process, we're undergoing what we call a leadership pipeline analysis and evaluation that will come to the board for their guidance and their discussion as well. And I think it'll serve LACERA quite well into the future. In terms of the OOP charter, I believe that the OOP charter is due for a reevaluation. I think it gets looked at every 3 years, and I believe we're about 6 months behind. So we will definitely make that a priority so that we can review it and discuss it amongst the executive team and our managers. And then we'll move forward with trying to come up with some adjustments to the OOP charter, working through the OOP chair as well and through that committee also. So I just wanted to lend those particular comments, and I do want to thank the consultant team and the IA folks for their efforts. I'll be honest, that we didn't really see a whole lot of surprises in that particular report. We had been working on a lot of those initiatives for 2 years now. And so it was nice to see that from a higher level that we were on the right track in terms of trying to implement some changes into the organization that will benefit the management of the organization and our members ultimately moving forward. So with that, I'll yield to the chair.
Thank you. And I will take the last comment before turning it over to Mr. Griffin. I think one of the things that I am reading between the lines with, especially as regards the comments around item 5 and the overlap, as well as just this kind of notion of, how do you operate effectively as a public agency with a commitment to the directives of a public agency while still maintaining some modicum of effectiveness and efficiency. And I think that we are kind of constantly running the gauntlet, as is, I think, the case with many public agencies, between bureaucracy and effectiveness. And sometimes and I feel like lately we have been tilting more towards bureaucracy to the detriment of effectiveness. And I think where that comes out strangely is in fraud prevention and detection. We sometimes view sort of an over compliance mentality, which leads sometimes to a lack of transparency, which leads to the ability to really effectively put forward a good fraud prevention program, because there aren't sort of natural kind of things that bind us together in an effective way. And so I actually think that item number 6 should be upgraded in its importance as to what we should be doing as an organization, with the kind of thought that transparency and effectiveness in the organization has to be something that we think about as we're figuring out these other issues. And these are thorny issues. These are not simple issues to figure out. But, you know, this notion of sort of being paralyzed as an organization, trying to figure out who has what responsibility, and whether or not, you know, the board is micromanaging, and whether or not the you know, executive is being held to account. All of those things need to occur in a way that results in an effective organization. So that's my comment there. So I'll yield to Mr. Griffin. I'd love to hear your comments now that you've heard the conversation.
It's quite an interesting conversation. Good morning, everyone. You know, this report contains a lot of material. And the interesting thing here is, I'm sure it's not a surprise to most of you. Anybody who's been around for a while is seasoned. What has happened, though, it's been brought together, and a big floodlight has been shined on it. Now everybody's sitting around looking at this, you know, all these issues, and they're all interrelated. And I'm going to make some comments about how they tie in. But first off, I think there really should be some follow-up. And regardless of how you approach it from an organizational perspective and who has responsibility for it, you know, in terms of the issues, not the reporting, because, you know, it was an audit or it was a consulting report. It's, you know, it's part of your charge to have follow-up on that. But then you get into a bigger question of, you know, I guess with operations committee and management. You know, the thing that I saw, and I saw several things, but one of the things, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, you had a big conversation about DEI, about the RFP for the audit. And I think equity is part of governance. And we really don't have much of any discussion here. And I know with my little school board, we've got a major initiative as part of our governance on equity. And I would hope in the future this would be addressed, because I think it needs to be in the fabric of LACERA's governance structure. So that's one point. I think there are some good points. I'll tie in a point that the fraud issue. I think if you had your risk assessment, which you just basically have a low level kind of the green bar, whatever that green bar, how it was described, you have that. And I'm kind of surprised, you know, like the chair was, about the assessment and why it's not higher, because fraud schemes and fraud in general is getting far more complex. And the hits, while being, you know, the percentages may be smaller, the hits and the likely outcomes, it's, you know, high stakes. And you know, you guys have got a lot of things that your protections you're built in, but I think your risk assessment would say that fraud detection, fraud prevention needs to get more attention. I also think that the management response really is one of the things that needs to be included here. And I don't know that you have to agree. I don't know that you have to have process, but I think it's only fair to the committee once this report's been presented is to hear, and that's something I don't have myself the benefit of. So let me see if there's anything else. Succession planning also is tied in because as the CEO was discussing about the plans and the pipeline, I don't know a lot about the county. The contracts I have with the county, they seem to have some mentoring and some programs that are trying to develop people, trying to get them familiar with the organization. I don't know the full depth and breadth of that. I know good talent is hard to come by. It's very expensive to replace people, and you lose efficiencies every time, you have turnover. And I think you really, it may not be succession planning in the perspective of a large for-profit corporation, but it is definitely, people run your organization. The talent that you have here, you have to develop, and they're, the people are very, very valuable. Let me see. I think those are my comments, and I think everybody else has pretty well put everything else out there on the table. So did I follow up on no, I think that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. If I could just get your kind of specific thoughts on the recommendation that was made by staff, which is that that following the results of this engagement, that the audit staff work with management to develop a more detailed follow-up plan, so that follow-up plan can be put on the recommendation follow-up. What do you think about that as sort of the method for how this gets followed up? Because right now these are very big, broad things.
Yeah.
And it would be hard to determine if they've been accomplished.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you have to calendar this, and and I think it becomes timing in terms of first off, what is important and what are we going to work on and what isn't important, and this is why we're going to work on this is what we think is important, and this is why we think it's important, and this is things we're not going to work on, and they need, I believe it would be appropriate to bring it back so the committee has an understanding of how they're going to proceed. And I'm not, this is just sort of common sense. You're hiring an auditor to kind of say, okay, we just paid a lot of money for an engagement. There's a lot of significant areas there. It's a lot to digest, but I think you need to hear back in a timely manner. And and the other thing, and I think you need to sort of monitor this. One of I think the criteria was, boy, all the hands are popping up everywhere. Forgive me for one of the things that they, was talked about was monitoring. And I think, there needs to be some monitoring by somebody in the organization that's not management in terms of the progress. So I'm going to quit talking before more hands get raised.
Okay, Mr. Kelly. You're on mute.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I wanted to put forth a motion, which is to receive the report with the exception of a reclassification of the fraud finding from medium to high, and with a further direction to staff to report back to the committee with management response and a recommendation regarding audit observation follow-up. That would be my motion. And I think that encompasses what we've been discussing so far.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that motion?
I will second that motion that we put that on the floor. I may have a few comments about it, but I want to get discussion on that. Because I think that we ought to have a management response given all of the discussion on each one of the items. I mean, not exclude, include, or exclude, just a management response on each item. So I would like to maybe modify the motion that they respond to each item.
Agreed. That my motion assumed they would, but I'm fine clarifying.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Martin? Alyssa?
Sorry, I was trying to take me off mute. I wanted to address two items in the commentary from the engagement methodology and approach. First, workforce planning, and specifically how diversity falls into workforce planning is part of the initial attributes in the structure and accountability. So that just from a fact standpoint. Secondarily, these 9 observations are very large, and they are encompassing across many things. Strategic plan, as was mentioned, would encompass many of these other activities already. Internal audit has the full achievement, partial achievement assessment underlying information on the 176 attributes that made up the overall governance model, and can be very specific in working through prioritization and in what our evaluation found or did not find to be in place. So I just wanted to mention those 2 things as you continue.
Great. Thank you. And Mr. Kryman, last comment.
Yes,
You are
I
on mute.
wanted to just make a comment. I think that that what we're talking about, and even the board motion, we don't have a problem preparing a management response, but I think it's a little premature, because quite frankly, if I have to write a management report, it's going to say we're in the process, we're in the middle of a strategic planning process, and we'll report back to you after it's completed. And then the other nuance is that this is really, you're describing some of the difficulties that we have with some of the governance structures and the committee structure that we have, because the strategic plan is going to be addressed by the entire Board of Retirement, and I would imagine with input from the Board of Investments as well. And they're going to set the priorities, and they're going to provide the guidance in terms of what those overall strategic direction is going to be. And then the action plans that will be developed through the executive team will come up and will be part of our management response. So that's going to take a few months. So I just want to make sure that you all understand, if you want me to write a management response for each one of these items, it's going to be a 1-sentence C strategic plan in December, because I don't want to run in front of any decisions or any comments or guidance that the Board of Retirement is going to provide to us as part of that plan. And so I just want to make sure that I point that out, because I want to make sure that the expectation level is set, and we all understand that we're trying to get to the same place, but we may be on different paths and at different parts of the track, right? We're still on the curve, and I think you guys are on the home stretch there. And so I just want to make sure we harmonize that.
Right. And thank you, Mr. Kryman. It was actually my assumption that the timing of that response would come after the strategic plan. So that was my assumption, but thank you for clarifying it for anyone who wasn't on the same wavelength. Mr. Moore?
I would be okay with what Mr. Kryman just outlined. I just want a response. That's all. It doesn't have to be a dissertation on each item. It could be exactly what Mr. Kryman said, which is this issue is going to be addressed in our strategic plan, which we plan to present to you in October or whatever that is. So that we know that each one of these items have been looked at and there's some way that we're going to address them. That's all I would expect.
Okay, super. So we have a motion and we have a second. Do we have any more comments? Well, thank you for, I think this was a great conversation, and it was one that we needed to have. And I think it is going to beget further conversations, but it will certainly seed the strategic planning process with some thoughts as well. So let's go ahead and take a vote, please.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Well, okay, hopefully the next two items will be shorter. Let's move on to our next item, which is the risk and control assessment of the retired healthcare division. And I think that is going to be Christina Sun.
Yes, good morning, Chair Sanchez and Audit Committee. The Risk and Control Assessment Project is a consulting engagement where internal audit performed an in-depth risk and control assessment of the retired healthcare division. So a consulting engagement provides management with formal assessments and advice for improving LACERA's governance, risk management, and control process without internal audit assuming management responsibility. So the engagement framework that we use is based on the internal control framework published by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, which is commonly known as the COSO framework. We chose the COSO framework as it provides industry best practices for risk management and internal control evaluation. The COSO framework is sponsored by professional associations such as the IIA and the AICPA. Our ultimate goal with the risk and control assessment is to evaluate individual LACERA division using this same approach. For this inaugural project, we selected the retired healthcare division because it was one of the smaller divisions of LACERA that we haven't audited in the past few years. So the scope of our work was limited to a review of RHC's processes in effect during the fiscal year 2022. Overall, we found that RHC management has adequate control activities in place to mitigate risk for its primary business processes. So primary business process consists of core operations to RHC. And at the same time, we also identified opportunities for improvement as noted in the engagement findings and observations, which should further strengthen the control environment of RHC. So the two findings are short-term risks related to business objectives and policy procedures maintenance. We believe management can address these using existing resources. Additionally, we noted 4 observations relating to broader operating risks that require executive office's strategic efforts. So due to the observation requiring a longer time period to address, we weren't going to track them as part of RECO follow-up. And then lastly, because this is a consulting engagement, we include a second deliverable, which is a risk and control matrix that documents all of RHC's business processes. The matrix was completed by internal audit based on the information gathered during the engagement. It is meant to be a value-add product to management as it provides details on every business process, the associated risk and controls. Both of the deliverables are located in the section 2 of the report. Before I conclude my presentation, I would like to thank the RHC staff and management for their cooperation with this consulting engagement. Thank you, and I will take any questions.
I'm going to start by just making a quick comment that I don't like the trend about not putting things on the RECO follow-up. I fought long and hard to make that process effective, and I don't like circumventing it, and that's how it feels. So just that's my knee-jerk comment there. And so I'm not going to accept items like this not going on the RECO follow-up. Sorry. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree regarding the recommendation follow-up. I think you need to find that Kool-Aid in the refrigerator and throw it out because too many people are drinking it. Look, we have a process in place where the audit committee, these things are important. We track them according to the regular process, period. We don't morph these procedures into maybe here, maybe there, et cetera. Christina, thank you very much for the report. I thought it was very well done. It was very well written. It was easy to follow. My one comment, I have 2 comments. One is I think it would be appropriate to define consulting engagement. You say early on in one of the first paragraphs, this is a consulting engagement, but it's not always clear to folks who are not kind of around this space for a minute, how that differs from an audit, how that differs from an agreed upon procedure. So I just think it would be helpful to define consulting engagement. The other thing is, I think you have to square a little bit your position at the front end of the report, which is that the division's policies and procedures are one of its strengths from an internal control perspective, with all the hits you identify in the detailed part of the report where you say that the policies and procedures need some improvement. That didn't align to me as well as it probably should have. There's just a constructive comment. But I thought it was overall well done, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so can we assume that this will get tracked? Ms.
Yes.
Logan? Great. Thank you, Ms. Sun.
Madam
All
Chair,
right.
I would move the accepting the report. I think that's the right language.
Accept and file with the requirement to put it on the recommendation follow-up.
Exactly. I move that.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Do you have a second?
Second.
All right. Let's take a vote.
Okay, Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes to accept and file.
Okay, super. Our next audit is the rehired retiree program audit, and Mr. Amick will be giving us that.
Yes, hello again. I just want to, excuse me, preemptively say that these audit recommendations will be tracked.
Thank you.
You've been listening.
A little background. So LACERA allows for the county to rehire its retirees if they believe they possess special skills and qualifications. However, there are numerous compliance stipulations that must be met. For example, one of the bigger ones is rehired retirees are limited to working 960 hours in a fiscal year. And there is also a required break in service before the rehired retiree returns. That could be a minimum of 90 days or a maximum of up to 180 days. And that's really dependent upon their age and the plan that they're involved in. So our objective of this audit was to assess LACERA's post-retirement policy and related procedures, as these policies and procedures ensure compliance with the various requirements. As a result of our audit, we did have an unsatisfactory rating, as we identified 3 areas that needed some improvement. The first one was specifically related to the administration of the program. Second, there was one 960-hour overage. It was, I believe, 59 hours over. And last was related to the limited duration requirements of rehired retirees. And please, I'd be welcome any questions at this time.
Okay, so Mr. Kelly, is that hand up left over from last time?
It was, but I'm going to raise it again.
Oh, okay, then Mr. Knox gets the first hand.
Yeah, he goes to the back of the line then.
Yeah.
Two quick things in terms of management's response. There's one where it talks about the 960 recommendation number 2. And I guess my concern was the management response sounds a little more aspirational. We agree we need to do everything we can to adhere to the regulations and prevent to the best of our ability any instances of overages. I mean, this is not a policy or a limit that LACERA created itself and has the flexibility to exceed when it, wants to.
Feels like it.
So yeah, I mean, it's a hard and fast rule that we have at LACERA, that we have in the county. So I would edit that down to say management agrees we need to adhere to the regulations and prevent any overages. The other thing that I would note is also management's response to number 3 agrees in general that retired staff members should be brought back for a limited duration to remain in compliance, but believes CERL is flexible enough to support with justification bringing back a retired staff member on a cyclical basis. And I don't disagree. I just think there's times, my impression, that LACERA has a bit of an over-reliance on instances like this. I think for issues like the call center vacancies, audit, with the vacancies we talked about earlier today, I think there's times when it makes sense. I just think that LACERA has a tendency to bake that in as just, oh no, this is how we operate by bringing back retirees all the time on a cyclical basis. But then on the other hand, oh my gosh, we have vacancies, we're trying to fill them. So two comments, not looking for a response, just my impression on those two items. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Mr. Kelly?
Nathan, thank you for the report. I thought it was well done.
Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Knox's comments. I think the agency sometimes overthinks these things. Look, the timekeeping system for the county will show the retiree how many hours he or she has worked. If it's 920 hours, the retiree cannot work 80 hours in the next time period. I mean, it's that simple. And the wording made it sound so much more complicated than it is. And I completely disagree with the response on number 3 that Mr. Knox noted. Look, the same person should not be back every year for 10 years. That's absolutely ridiculous. And I hope that the next year's budget reflects the cessation of that practice. It's meant to provide temporary assistance. There are a lot of structural issues that came out to me in this report that I thought were really excellent. And I would hope, Mr. Santos, that in next year's budget, some of these structural issues are addressed. These have been structural issues for a long time. 8 or 9 years when I first came on the Board of Retirement, they were the same issues in terms of the call center and some of the staffing issues. But that 10-year thing needs to stop. So thank you very much, Nathan.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments, or do I have a motion to receive and file?
I would move to receive and file the report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. You've been moving a lot this morning.
I'll second. Here to assist
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Knox. Thank you, Mr. Knox. We'll take a vote.
Okay, Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay, so we have a time check. It's 10:10 and we have one presentation and several reports. I'd like to just power through. Is everybody comfortable with that, or do we need a break?
I say power through.
Power through. All right, onward. So let's go on.
Okay,
Ms.
are we
Logan?
going to?
Or,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ms. Collins.
Hey, good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees of the Audit Committee. On page 3 of the cover memo for this agenda item, you'll find our final audit plan status report for fiscal year end 2022. Now, you may recall at each meeting, we do provide an update on the status of completion of our audit plan. And now that the fiscal year has ended, we are providing our annual performance report. So this is a summation of all work that we've done throughout the year. It's a very comprehensive report. There's a lot of information. I know the meeting's been going long, so I'll just highlight some of the key areas. So let's start with slide number 4. Here's our org chart of the internal audit team. For fiscal year end 2022, we had 11 budgeted positions, 10 of which are filled, and we have that 1 vacant internal auditor position, and then we have the 1 senior auditor position unknown with another division. Move on to slide 6. Okay, so this slide, it provides a good snapshot of what we worked on during the year. As of June 30th, we had completed 31 of the 46 projects. There were 7 in progress, and then 8 projects that were moved forward for fiscal year 2023. And that's illustrated in that top left chart. So the 31 completed project, that represents 68% of our audit plan. Our goal was 80%. So we did fall short of meeting that goal. And as Christina explained earlier, this is an area that we do take very seriously. We have a different sort of strategy for fiscal year 2023, so we can complete more of our audit plan. And then we're also focusing on our hours, where we are spending our time. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on that on another slide. Further down on the left side, the chart, that's a breakdown of those 31 completed projects by the type of project. And then over to the right, the lower right, that's a breakdown of all the hours. We had 12,680 hours that we spent during the fiscal year. Let's move to the next slide. So as I mentioned, staff spent 12,680 hours. We know that's the number because of our teammate tracking system. Now, one of the beauties of having this system is that we're able to see on a daily basis what everyone is working on, because all staff input their time on their assignments, and they indicate like what projects they're working on, and they also indicate any of the administrative time that they've used for that day. So that tallest pillar, the blue column, that's the 7,323 hours that were on direct audit services. So that includes when we're working on our audits. And we're also doing our oversight on the externally performed engagements, our recommendation follow-up, our risk assessment, and so forth. That middle orange column, that is, those are our internal audit operational projects that we've been working on. And there are about 2,400 hours spent there. That includes our quality assurance improvement program, our professional development, the audit committee support when we're making, when we're preparing for meetings and doing the materials, and also our teammate administration. And then the next column over, that gray column, where we spent almost 3,000 hours, that's administrative time. And as I mentioned, we're really looking at where we're spending our time. And that gray column, that's the focus for us as far as reducing the number of hours there. And the blue column, where we're actually doing more of the audits, that number should be increasing. And another note as far as the internal audit operations, where we spent the 2,400 hours, we did do a lot of enhancements to our processes and, making them better, looking at a record follow-up process and so forth. And so there will be a reduction in that type of work because moving forward, we have a better structure in place that we worked on during this past fiscal year. Let's move on to the next slide. One more slide, Gabe. Here's just a listing of all the completed, one slide up, please, Gabe. Okay, this is just a listing of all the completed audits and consulting projects throughout the year. I won't spend much time here because we have discussed these projects at each of our audit committee meetings, and there was even a lot of discussion today on the ones that were recently completed. Moving on. Here is just a listing of some of the other types of assurance projects and value-added activities that we do throughout the year. This includes the oversight. We oversee several externally performed engagements. This includes the SOC 1 Type 2 audit engagement, LACERA's financial audit. We have the real estate manager compliance reviews, the LACERA actuarial audit services. So that also takes some of our time. And then we have other tasks such as our ongoing risk assessment, our recommendation follow-up. We also have our external quality assessment that was performed earlier this year. So those are some of the other areas that we also spend our time on. Next slide. This is just a listing of those projects in progress as of the end of the fiscal year. As I mentioned earlier, there were several that were nearing completion towards the end of the year, and those are indicated, towards the top of this listing. So when you factor those in, we have about, I think, 36 of those projects on our fiscal year in 2022 audit plan that are pretty much completed. And then we have the 8 that we are rolling forward. So you'll see the other 8 are on our fiscal year in 2023 audit, our audit plan. Next slide. We'll move on to our goals.
Excuse me, Alicia, Madam Chair, can I ask a question on the previous slide?
Yes.
It was the previous slide. Yeah, here. The third line down, census testing. I think I was confused when I read this because I thought census as in United States Census.
Oh, no.
I think what you're referring to is the accumulation of demographic data on the retiree population to give to the actuary.
Yes, it is.
Why do you call it census testing? Why do you call it census?
I'm not quite sure where the term comes from. Christina, do you have?
That you think about maybe renaming it something else because it was confusing to me.
It is, okay. And then there is an agenda item. There's one of the reports later on that does speak to the census testing as well.
That is the term that's used by, right now I can't think of what the acronym stands for, but GASB, the General Accounting Standards Board.
Calls it census?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that's where we use, that's how we come to use that term.
Thank you.
Okay, as far as our goals, we had 3 goals for fiscal year 2022. For each goal, we had anywhere from 3 to 5 performance measurements. Here is the first goal. Goal number 1 is to develop and execute a risk-based audit plan. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the performance measurements was that 80% completion of our audit plan. And, we fell short of that. And we're including this as a performance measurement for fiscal year 2023 as well. So we will continue to make improvements in that area. One of the other performance measurements is, what's the next one? Oh, completing our risk assessment. And, we had a lot of discussion earlier regarding our risk assessment and some of the changes that we made as far as the reporting to the audit committee. We did expend the 70% of our time on assurance consulting and advisory services. So we did meet that goal. And then that last goal relates to recommendation follow-up. We have put that as a performance measurement to ensure that 75% of the recommendations are implemented within their prescribed deadlines. We found that that measurement is not, I can't say it's not attainable, it's not really a good measurable performance indicator for us. What we found was that we definitely follow up on all our recommendations, we track them, we report them, but we do find that there are extensions that are made for some recommendations. So there is always like a moving date for the completion of them. And we do follow up and we do discuss when those recommendations are, the dates being extended out. And there's an approval process we also go through with the executive office. So that's just a note.
Can I make a comment there? If you could, as you're thinking about how you report, if you think about sort of quantifying the number of projects whose date gets moved from the original date, I think that would also be insightful, because if we're moving the target too much in order to ensure that we remain in compliance, I don't think that helps either. So if you could.
Yes.
We do report that in our record.
Okay.
Yes, in
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I just mention that I think that that this particular item will be enhanced by the quarterly check-ins that was described in an earlier report, and so I suspect that this particular area will be significantly improved as a result of that change in process.
Got it.
Okay, moving on to goal number 2, which is to continue to improve internal audit's presence and value as key stakeholders. And now the performance measurements relating to this goal are more so the surveys. So we do survey all the auditees after the completion of the audit. And this year we also sent surveys out to the audit committee as well as the executive team. And so you can see the results here. Our overall goal, the performance measurement, was that we would achieve at least an 80% or more approval rating. And what we got from these surveys also we were able to see, even though we did receive a high approval rating, but we do look at the comments. And for example, with the audit committee surveys, we did receive some comments. Even though we only received 2 surveys, we would in the future like to receive more, but we did receive some comments, and we do use those comments as far as a way to make improvements in our processes as well. And then, let me see, one of the other performance measurements was to have those educational pieces for our audit committee. Our performance measurement was 3, but we only provided 2. There was one earlier during the audit committee orientation on the IIA standards, and then we had another one on risk that was provided, I think, a couple months after that. And then that last performance measurement relates to, I can't see the training to, and the training that was provided to the senior management team, which we completed as well. Next slide. So this last goal really relates to internal audits, competencies, and efficiencies. This is where we're working on ways to improve the internal audit team. Pretty much on those first 2 performance measurements, we did achieve those. The first was the external quality assessment review that was conducted in February, and we received the highest rating on that. And then it's 100% of the completion of our staff training. Everyone on the team has a professional designation, and with that comes training. So we use that as an opportunity not only to meet those requirements, but also in ways that we can improve the work that we do. And then that last part, the last performance measurement, this really relates to the documentation of our audit work papers. And it is an area that we are still working on. We wanted to ensure that we are fully and completely documenting all of our audit work papers. We know that there is still some improvement that we need to do here. One of the things that we have implemented is that for every audit after it's completed, there is a quality assurance check. And this is done by the chief audit executive and also the principal, where we're going back through looking at the work papers and identifying if they're, if they're incomplete or if there are any issues, but, that's still another area that we're working on.
Can I make a comment here, Ms. Collins? I think going forward, one thing to think about in this kind of area would be to potentially add a goal of trying to reduce the volatility of your forecasted hours versus the actual hours, such that the results of those, what drives that volatility is unexpected outcomes, as opposed to I just padded the amount just in case I needed extra time. You know what I mean? I think it also just makes it hard for us to know what we're going to accomplish in the year. So I think if we could start to try to reduce those numbers so that we could really see where things just took longer because of things that were out of the control of the auditor, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and something that we're doing this year is when we start an audit, we do have an estimated sort of hours, but what we're doing is after the preliminary phase, the auditor and the principal and the chief audit executive is sitting down and we're reviewing all the information obtained during the preliminary stage. And that's when we're actually defining the scope and also the hours. And then what we're going to be doing also is we have weekly staff meetings, and during those staff meetings, we're going to provide updates where we can all visually see how much time we're spending on each of our projects, and also so we'll have the estimated versus the actual hours. When it's getting to the point that an audit is, there's going to be an overrun, we're also going to be looking at having the auditors really justify why additional hours are needed, and also really looking at the work that's being done. So those are some of the ways that we're going to sort of address that.
Okay, super. But I'm also thinking and looking at sort of audits that look like they were rushed, where 100 hours were set, were estimated and they took 4 or 2. That is a big difference. And so it just makes me wonder, what did you miss? So, I think it goes in both directions. I think you want to just reduce that overall volatility.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the next slide. One more slide. Quality Assurance Improvement Program. This is part of the IAA standards, that there is a Quality Assurance Improvement Program, which includes both internal assessments as well as external assessments. As I mentioned earlier, we had our external quality assurance review that's conducted on a 5-year basis. We did receive the highest rating from that. There were some recommendations for improvements for us, and I'll go over that in the next slide. But as far as our quality assurance improvement program, some of the things that we did this year, one of the notable things was the competency framework. The IIA, I think it was 2020, they came out with a competency framework. It's very specific to auditors. And what we did is the entire team went through and they did a self-assessment using this competency framework. And this is a tool that we're going to use as far as identifying those gaps between where we're at as far as a team and individually, and then where we need to be as far as our knowledge and experience and so forth. So that's a good tool that we'll be using. We continue to have monthly QAIP meetings, and this is where we look at, take a deeper dive into IAA standards, or we look at some other audit techniques. And as a team, we discuss it, and it's just it's a learning experience for all of us there. Moving on to the next slide. As I mentioned, we had our EQA. At each meeting, we're planning to update you with how we've been implementing the recommendations. We had 23 recommendations, 8 have been completed. 2 of the new ones, one I just mentioned was the IA competency framework. We did complete that. And then there were some other fine tuning and enhancements that we made to procedures. Moving on to the next slide. Here's just our a summary of our internal periodic assessment. As I said, with the QAIP, there's both an external and an internal assessment that should be done. And on an annual basis, we do an internal assessment. We identify any areas for improvement. As you'll see here towards the bottom, there's a summary for fiscal year 2023 as far as improvements. They'll be in the areas of proficiency, engagement planning, and documentation of information. Next slide. Okay, and this last slide just provides a summary of our audit, the way that we've supported the audit committee, and the highlighted box next to each of the activity identifies at which meeting we completed the different tasks. And that concludes my presentation and my overview of our performance report.
Okay, super. Are there any further questions, or we'll just continue moving along? Great. All right. Ms. Collins, are you going to go ahead and just, the rest look like they're verbal. Are you just going to do brief remarks on each of them, or do you want to?
I have the next one, which I'll make very brief on the goals, and then the other staff have the other ones, and we'll make them all brief.
Okay, great.
Okay, so the next agenda item relates to our fiscal year end 2023 goals, pretty similar to fiscal year 2022. For each goal, we have performance measurements. That's on page 2 of the memo. I won't go through goal number 1 because it's similar to the past. Goal number 2, one thing to note here, because there was some discussion earlier on fraud prevention, one of our performance measurements is to provide training to the management team on internal controls, as well as fraud prevention. So that's one of our performance measurements. We will again send out the surveys to auditees, executive branch, and also to the audit committee in order to get some feedback. For number 2, and then as far as number 3, it relates to just how we plan to enhance the competencies and efficiencies of the internal audit group.
And Ms. Collins, can you, on goal number 3, can you explicitly add the sort of reduction of deviations from forecasted to actual? That would be super helpful. Thanks. All right. Any other comments? Okay, and now the census.
So I really quickly wanted to just jump in because I gave the wrong acronym for Mr. Kelly's comment. It's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board that uses the term census data.
Thank you.
And with And
Leave
with-
it to Gatsby.
With regards to census data, I'm going to keep this fairly quick. The census data is really a critical component when determining pension fund liability as well as employee and employer contributions. We give the data to our actuary. They give us evaluation. They give the board's recommendations. Recently, we performed some limited scope testing of the census data to assess the integrity of the data provided to our actuary. We did a year-to-year comparison of the most two recent files, looking at the significant details used in the various calculations. We were looking for any potential red flags or systematic errors. We did not find any. In 2023, we will be performing a full audit of the actuarial data. That includes how we obtain the data, how we store and categorize the data, and how we report the data to the actuary.
Thank you, Mr. Amick. And I want to note that where we can, I believe we are moving towards continuous auditing where we have data and more full auditing as opposed to sampling. And I think that is, something that technologically we can now start to envision. So thank you for that. Moving on. Are any other comments? Moving on.
Yes, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is the census information collected for the actuary include gender and race? And if it doesn't, why not?
Oh, I definitely know it takes in gender. I'm not exactly sure with regards to race. I did not see that field in the file. As to why it's not included, that was a question that I would have for the actuary, as they they understand why
could
they
you
need
just at the next audit committee meeting, could you just address that issue of how race and gender are used in this kind of information?
Okay.
I don't want to belabor the point, just I want to know though.
Noted.
Okay. Moving on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So moving on to the next item.
This is the update on the staff bonus policy. Carly?
Yes, now I'll briefly speak to the update on the staff bonus policy. Chair Sanchez, if I may, briefly. So it outlines, as part of IA's review, it necessitated us to really look at all of our bonus policies and revise some of the language with respect to those policies and adherence to those policies. So I don't know if Ms. Notoya is here, but we did, as a management team, review all of the different bonus policies at LACERA and made respective revisions. And we are in the process, almost finalized the bonus policy. Ms. Notoya, if you can, Ms. Sanchez, if we can have Ms. Notoya provide an update on where we are with the finalization of that policy.
Sure.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Mr. Lugo. At the May 2020 Audit Committee meeting, the Audit Committee presented its findings on the staff bonus policy, and the committee asked for follow-up. So today we'll be following up on a couple of the items, management commitments, and our progress toward them so far. There were two major findings, one related to the creation of a policy and second related to reporting. So I apologize. I hope you can hear me a little bit better. The issues related to creation of the bonus policy, we did create a more comprehensive bonus policy. It was provided to the executive office and approved before the established deadline of June 30th. That was presented in the audit committee report. Since then, we've done a couple of other things to make sure that it is rolled out and implemented well throughout the organization. We have provided training to our MAC team, and we have pending this month will provide training to the SAC team so that all parties are aware of what the policy consists of and their responsibilities for implementing the policy. Once that is done, we will post the policy on LACERA Connect for all staff members to be able to view and familiarize themselves with. Additionally, we have done some pilot testing, I think would be a good term, with the 2022 to 2023 bonus requests. We are evaluating them against this current policy to see if there's anything else that needs to be shored up. We have found a few enhancements that need to be made, and so we made them and are continuing with the policy. And the last portion, or the second recommendation, I should say, second management commitment, as it's phrased in the in this memo, is that we will provide bonus reports. So the executive team has already been provided bonus reports twice, once a quarter, once in, I think that's February and June, could be March and June. The next one is due in September. And with that, the division managers will also be provided the report.
Great, thank you. And I see that you very strategically put this item right before the RECO follow-up, where this was the only behind schedule item. So thank you for that, Ms. Nichoya.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, Ms. Sun.
Yes, good morning again. This is our fourth quarter reporting on the status of open audit recommendations. In this past quarter, internal audit verified 2 recommendations implemented by management. Additionally, we closed but did not verify 7 recommendations related to the systems division. The reason is because we plan to audit this risk area in the new engagement under inventory asset management in fiscal year 2023. And since fiscal year 2022 has come to your end, we would like to give a brief recap of the progress we made during the year. So we started the year with 27 outstanding recommendations. During the year, internal audit issued 14 new recommendations and management implemented 17. We closed 7 more this quarter, as mentioned earlier. This brings us a total of 17 recommendations at year end. And keep in mind that recommendation issued in fiscal year 2023, which started July 1st, 2022, will be reported out in the next audit committee meeting, and we will include the observations in the 2 reports discussed in this meeting in the report as well. And we have provided a detailed report of all the open recommendations in the appendix. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the follow-up for sensitive information technology areas.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. Our IT sensitive recommendation follow-up covers the period from May 1st, 2022 through July 31st, 2022. 2 recommendations have been implemented during this reporting period. 36 recommendations are in progress. 45 are implemented from prior periods, and there are no new recommendations for this reporting period. Of the 36 recommendations in progress, 3 are high-risk recommendations related to the Moss Adams engagement, 19 are medium, and 14 are low. Additionally, for the fiscal year ended June 2022, the Systems Division and the Information Security Office have implemented 26 recommendations. We continue to work closely with the Systems Division and the Information Security Office to address recommendations timely. Lastly, I want to thank Kathy Delano, Bob Schlotfeld, and Sunny Voom and their teams for working with us as we monitor the progress and status of recommendations. Staff, if needed, are prepared to address any questions the committee may have. But please remember that due to the confidentiality and the sensitive nature of these IT recommendations, we cannot provide additional details. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Hearing none. Thank you for that. And we
Thank you.
appreciate the effort. All right, status of other external audits.
There's only one audit to report. It's in the Retirement Healthcare Division. They're preparing for the LACERA's annual Anthem Blue Crossing Cigna claims audit for fiscal year in 2022.
Got it. And internal staffing activity report.
There's nothing to report.
Okay, I do believe we've kind of covered it. The ethics hotline status report is provided for your information. I assume that if you have any findings out of that, they would come to this committee or they would be, okay, great.
Yes, they do.
All right, and then moving on to item 7, our consultant comments. Although Mr. Griffin, we have enjoyed your comments so far, and it spurred so many little hands. But
I have one final comment. It has to do with best practices. And I think perhaps Mr. Moore may have asked a question. There is a SACRS conference twice a year. There's an internal audit breakout section and best practices, including, and actually I've asked the chair of that to put risk assessment on there. Best practices are shared by all the internal audit groups that are part of the SACRS. And it's, you know, it's informative for auditors. Nobody else ever goes. That's my report.
Thank you, and thank you for reminding us that that is a great resource that is at our disposal. Items for staff review.
Okay, the committee requested that the staff will adjust the font and paper size for better readability. Staff will provide an update regarding the staff on the loan for Internal Audit Division and hiring plan. Diversity, equity, and inclusion due diligence will be included in the RFP process. Staff will look at the committee charters and bring back to the respective committee for review. Audit committee should be, audit recommendations should be all tracked and placed on the follow-up report. I'm sorry. Placed on the RECO follow-up report. In addition, consulting engagements should be further defined and address the rehire retiree program during the budget season. Also add a new goal in tracking budgeted to actual hours and use on engagements, and address how race and gender are used in the census data and actual testing at the next audit committee.
Thank you. We have been a productive group this morning. Thank you for taking those very diligent notes. Anybody was anything missed?
The only thing I would add on the comment about readability is on the font is getting smaller and smaller, and it's too hard to read. But also, I think that the slides contain too much narrative. Sometimes I think the narrative from the report is excerpted into the slide itself. If you could look to fine tune the narrative on the slide itself, I think that would help. Also, as you look to increase the font.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right. And on to good.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Granger wanted to provide a comment.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I just had a quick comment on the question regarding ethnicity and the tracking of that data within the Milliman database. I was able to get a hold of our chief actuary, Nick Collier at Milliman, and he indicated that the ethnicity data is not tracked in Milliman's database. However, I believe that per Kathy D in our IT section, it is tracked on the LACERA side, but it's not tracked on the Milliman side, and it's not used in the valuation. So just wanted to provide that information.
Thank you.
Okay, that was race, ethnicity, but not gender. What about gender?
Gender is.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify, gender is tracked by Milliman and used in the valuation. Ethnicity is not tracked by Milliman and not used in the valuation.
Okay, then that's the answer to the question. You can take that off of the follow-up list.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Popovich?
I was just going to add that we track the ethnicity based on the information that the county provides us. Not everybody, I believe, is required to provide or identify as a particular ethnicity. So the data that we track is the best data that the county can provide us. It's not comprehensive. And I just wanted to share that because periodically we do provide that, or we'll be providing that to trustees. And I just wanted to put a clarification on the comprehensiveness of it.
Okay, great. Moving on to good of the order.
Mr. Jones?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Excellent meeting. Thank you for all of your efforts. Also, thank you for, to me, a noticeable improvement in the reports that we received. Less fluffy, more fact-based. They came across as much more professional to me. So thank you for the entire team for their efforts there. I think we're seeing the benefits of automation and teammates, and more supervisory management reviews. So that's all great. So thank you very much.
Mr. Knox?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to staff. Very good meeting. Certainly pass along my well wishes to Mr. Bendel. And then we were talking about diversity, this morning, and I was going to mention that last week my department co-sponsored a networking mixer for various affinity groups in the public finance sector. Very well attended. I think there was probably 75 people there, a dozen different firms. And it's just a great way to engage the industry and emphasize the Board of Supervisors' expectations and my expectations about diversity in firms. And it wasn't tied to a specific solicitation. So I just wanted to pass that along as an option for LACERA as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Great meeting. Appreciate Mr. Knox's comment. It's something that I'm sure the staff is going to take note of. And that's all I have to add.
Mr. Santos?
Very much for the staff, consultants. Great meeting, great job. I think we have a lot of work to do. Or rather, management has a lot of work to do. And I'll be looking forward to hold all of you managers accountable for all the tasks that needs to be done. My model is trust but verify, and that's really important. Everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Chair Sanchez?
Thank you. So I think that over the last several years, we've been making a lot of investments and improvements into the process happening in audit, and it's really starting to show, and I'm very pleased. And I think the next natural outcome of that is to sort of extend that effort to management and across the organization. And so I'm excited that we're doing a strategic plan. It's something we've talked about since the day I joined the board 5 years ago. So better late than never. That's my motto. And I think that this effort extending to management and beyond will only be beneficial for the organization, but I will continue to underscore that the balance and the challenge at public agencies is to balance bureaucracy with effectiveness. And I do think we have to keep that in mind. And we're feeling that crimp in certain areas like staffing and other areas, even usability of the IT policy right now makes me pull my hair out. And so, I think that we have to think about that balance as we kind of move forward as an organization, because that's the challenge. And we have to not confuse, I think, a compliance orientation with an ethics orientation. Those are two very different things. And fraud can happen in a compliance organization. Ethics is your last sort of, it's your last way to prevent effective fraud. It's one of the reasons that I think we have to think about that. So those are my comments. And yeah, and with that, I will wish everyone a good day.
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to just extend our positive thoughts to Richard on behalf of the management team and the staff. And I also wanted to recognize Leisha and Christina and the rest of the internal audit team, because they really stepped up and, we had a great meeting, great discussions. And my expectation is that, there won't be any fall off and every single member of Leisha and Christina's team will raise the level of their game during this period, and we'll have a new bar that hopefully will get set. So thank you, Leisha and Christina, for stepping up to the plate. We would greatly appreciate it on behalf of our members, as well as myself as the CEO.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
That is something I think we all agree
To
with.
adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We have a motion to adjourn. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.